The game turns you into someone who wants to make money, and depending on how fair you play with your family, sometimes you're going to be more aggressive and maybe you take the money from your children, and sometimes you're going to be a little bit more friendly. And I can put you into another game and instantly you're going to show a different behavior.
Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. I'm Richard Metcalf, founder of X Quadrant, and my mission is to help the world's top CEOs and entrepreneurs shift from incremental to exponential progress and create a huge positive impact on our world. Now, that requires you to reinvent yourself and transform your business. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. How do you manage change? This is a question on the lips of almost every chief executive and entrepreneur. It becomes a huge deal, but most people are doing it wrong. Mark Poppenborg is the chief executive of Intrinsify. He works mainly in the German-speaking markets, but he's dedicated his life, his career, to understanding what makes organizations really tick and how to make change happen. And here's the thing, it's not how you think. In fact, you need to ignore individuals to respect them fully. You need not to think about companies fundamentally as being people and think about them in a completely other way. You need to really understand how context impacts behavior. In this conversation, Mark gives some really valuable insights and reframes for any leader looking to lead change in their team, in their organization, or across their entire business. So, hope you love this conversation with Mark Poppenborg. Hi, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Richard. Thank you very much.
So, I want to dive straight in. Ignore individuals. That's your mantra. It sounds like it's something from the Borg or from some fascist state. Ignore individuals. That's your recommendation to business leaders. And again, I know that many of us would think, organizations, the heart of organizations, what it's all about, an organization is people. And you say, no, it's not. It's not about the people. So tell me more. Are you really on a secret mission to turn us all into a faceless entity? What's going on?
Yeah, I think on the surface, I've been criticized for that quite often, for saying you have to ignore people. But you forgot to add, I know you consciously did, forgot to add the second part of the sentence, which is you can only respect people fully if you ignore them. And that is that comes from an insight that is how a context always shapes people's behaviors, in my experience, and also that's theory driven. So I think the larger an organization gets, the more the behavior is no longer determined by a person's personality and their characteristics, but a lot more by the context. So the way people behave in their workplace, the targets they follow, the interests they have, the fights they fight, the projects they pursue or they try to stop, all those things. Also, how orientated they are towards the customer has a lot to do with the surrounding they're in, and that is made up of the culture and the explicit rules, the formal structure of the organization.
So let me just check in with that. So what I'm hearing is that whereas we tend to think, right, that people, they're just a certain way, and this person here is just lousy at customer service, or this person here is not innovative, what you're saying is actually that's an artifact of the organization and not of the person.
Yes, exactly. The first thing when someone describes a certain behavior to me is always, why would I behave in the same way? Why would someone else behave in the same way? What is the pattern that dictates this behavior? And if we jump straight to the conclusion that it's down to the person, then our object of influence will be the person. We're going to try to change that person. And I think that's highly disrespectful, because we assume that it's down to them to change themselves in order for the organization to change.
Okay, so that's why you say if you want to respect people, you need to ignore them, in the sense of saying, don't focus on trying to change them, but look at the overall context. I'm going with you.
Yeah, try to understand the game that's being played. I love the game comparison because it's so easy to illustrate. Like if you play Monopoly, say, and you've probably experienced this with your family, like you almost turn into a different person, don't you? The game turns you into someone who wants to make money, and depending on how fair you play it with your family, sometimes you're going to be more aggressive and maybe you take the money from your children, and sometimes you're going to be a little bit more friendly. And I can put you into another game and instantly you're going to show a different behavior. And I think this is quite, a lot of people can associate with this when they change departments or when they go to a different company. They can almost witness how they change personality as well. They can see, or when you go into a different context during the day, if you pick up your phone, you're speaking to your partner, instantly you feel like you're someone else to a certain degree, some less, some more. So the context has a deep influence on who we are even, and especially on how we behave. And I think that's often overlooked and is a massive leverage if you compare it to all the personal development programs that are being, just poured out onto organizations, but a lot of money being spent, often fueling cynicism and frustration with employees.
So what I'm hearing is that this is a system at play. And it's really fascinating because I see it so many times that people are saying, you know what, I just can't get good quality people, right? Or I've inherited the team and they're just performing in a certain way. There's a great story that I know. I think it was who did this? It was a story of Navy SEALs, right? And they took two teams in that week of Navy SEAL training, where you basically, it's a nightmare week. Nobody gets any sleep. They're in groups. They have to do endurance test after test, and the ones who the top team always gets the next exercise off. They get to rest for 10 minutes and get some blessed rest. And the losing team each time has to double down and do punishment and extra press ups and everything. And one team was always coming last and getting falling even further behind because they're even more tired. And the guy who was basically just allocated amongst his peers to be the leader was like, "This is not fair. You gave me the, these are losers. Like, why have I got the team of losers? But this team over here is always winning." Well, he just got a lucky team, right? So they swapped over the leaders. And in the very next session, the bottom team came first. And now the top team didn't actually come last because by that stage, they'd already got enough momentum and kind of self-understanding to not do that. And I think it's just a really interesting thing that so often we assume it's the people, whereas actually the context is so important.
And it's really hard to see that, isn't it? Because you can only see behavior. You can't look into people's minds. So you're forced to derive your assumptions about people's nature from the behavior you witness. And I think that can turn into a downward spiral or even a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if I account for the fact that I think these people are lazy, don't like working, don't like taking responsibility, etc., I'm going to put structures in place that account for that belief, which takes even more responsibility away from them. And that turns into what I'm sure you've witnessed a million times in big companies, where we put the reaction to every impression of unresponsible employees is putting in place more measures that lead to central governance. So you end up with sales targets, with commission systems, with appraisal systems, and obviously they all catch people's attention, and people start orientating their attention towards the inner works of the system rather than looking at what the customer actually needs. And you're creating a framework which feeds the belief that you've already had in the first place, and it just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, as you say it comes so obvious, right? The number of things, it's almost like there is a certain level of mid to senior management in a lot of corporations whose role, or see their role as building this machine, right? These systems to control people. And the problem with that is that machines are great in a kind of a static environment, right? But they're very bad at adapting to changing situations, right? Because they're configured in a certain way. And I think that's what happens in organizations, right? If you see organizations as organisms that are evolving and depending on each other and have got all these interconnections, then things look very different. but I suppose sounds like politics, right? Like lots of people write laws, very few people remove laws, so you end up just with this accumulation.
I think what you're saying is it comes from a place of super important and deep insight. Like when I started, I'm one of these guys who came out of uni and went straight into a small consultancy. So I didn't know what I was talking about, but I was advising general managers on what they were meant to do, right? It was a complete disaster. I feel ashamed for it in hindsight. Obviously, I learned more than they did. And my whole upbringing and my whole indoctrination, let's call it, that I got from uni was organizations are machines and they're controllable. And in order to control them, I need good governance and central governance. And based on that belief, I was building my entire, and we were, as a company, we were building our entire consultancy practice. And that led to the same results every time. Every time we were going there and trying to build better measurement systems, better KPIs, better processes, and then make people stick to those, and completely overseeing that for what you just described as, dynamic environment, new problems that which you can't solve on past knowledge that is baked into rules and processes and checklists and stuff like that, requires ideas. So you need a framework in which people can take responsibility. It's not just nice for people; it's a necessity for value creation to face the dynamic value creation challenges that companies are faced with today. And what we were doing is we were implementing methods on a micro level and missing the bigger picture, missing that it needs a framework that gives empowerment, gives responsibility to people who make or need to make the decisions on a daily basis. And there's so many little management instruments to take that away all the time. You've got all these project management systems in place. You've got investment planning. You've got budgets to meet. You've got targets to meet. You've got appraisals to look forward to or to dread, and all those things add to the result that we then witness, which is a disengaged workforce that is optimizing within a system rather than towards a customer.
So I think the leadership challenge here, and we're going to get into in a minute, I think, into what your work, and we can talk very practically about what would you do if you find you have this in your organization, you find you have some of these issues coming up. I think we want to go there. But what I want to touch with is, as a leader, there is a deeper leadership challenge at play, which is, do I want to be a leader that does the right thing and releases people for impact? Or do I want to cover my ass and just create predictability to deal with my own inner doubts and fears and concerns and sense of scarcity? And I really think it's important, because a lot of this stuff is like, I just need to control people, have a system, so that I can go to my boss, so that I can cover my, all this stuff. And some of it's coming from, probably coming from the right place in sense of wanting to improve things.
I think in both sectors, they want to do the right thing, right? They're coming from good intentions. Yep.
Yeah, they want to do the right thing. But there's also like there's also this sense of, what would happen if? How many rules in companies are implemented for the bottom 1%? The 1% who are really disengaged. And the problem is that's not a systems and process issue. That's a management issue. Like, deal with those 1% of people in whatever way, but don't improve systems. It's like airport security, right? It's like, but their lives are at stake, so we get it. But airport security is, there's 99.9% of people who never need to do anything on airport security because they're fine. But everyone has to go through it because you've got to catch the 0.1%. But in a company, that's not necessarily the case, right? And actually think of all the friction and problems that we create. So let's kind of turn the tables here and go a bit forward. So if I was a leader going, I'm not seeing the level of innovation, customer service, ownership that I want from my team, and I'm starting to think, it's them. Challenge me, and what could I do differently?
So I think one little thing I want to add to what you just said, before I go into that, is that I want to double down on the statement. They both come from good intentions, right? I think managers are always trying to do the right thing, but we always act from a place of our inner theories. So if I believe an organization is a controllable machine, I'm going to put things in place that follow that conviction. So I don't think it's necessarily down to people's mindset or their inner emotions. It's more about understanding the mechanics, if you like, of a system, how they actually work. If I've got those insights and they're readily available, but they're not abundant in management literature, then I can act differently. And what I would suggest is you take a real problem. So a lot of companies start like big projects like agile transformation, digital transformation, without actually having looked into the problem that might solve on a concrete level. So I would always suggest take a real problem. And a real problem I define as something that is either directly or potentially threatening your business. Are you losing customers to your competitors? Are you too slow? Is your quality declining? Is your image being hurt? Whatever external reference that has an influence on how your business can perform. And I would address one of these specific problems and ask myself, how can these insights that we just spoke about be explained by a framework that is in place and is encouraging the wrong behavior?
Can I just pick up on that? This idea of the real problem, I think it's a key one, because I often see people operate in the level of concepts, which you mentioned. Digital transformation is a concept. Innovation is a concept in a way, right? I mean, these things, we think we know what they are, but until we boil them down to what is the actual thing that I want to change, and what am I seeing right now and the impact that's having, almost like on a video film, and then what do I want to be seeing and the impact that that's having. And I think until we kind of can make it something, I say it passes the video camera test, can I actually observe it somewhere, then we can fix it.
Yeah, I like that. I often say, like, if we get approached by big companies and they ask a question like you do, like you did just now, I would say, in which department, where in which product segment, where is there a concrete problem that is causing you a real threat, and that you need to address? Why you're not sleeping badly because you are thinking about, can I implement digital methods? What makes you wake up too early or not fall asleep? What's nagging you is that the very thing that you're going to discuss at your next board meeting and the one after, which is really vital to the company, a true problem, as you say. And that's where I would come from. And then one very functional tool that we've played around with it a lot and had a lot of experience, a lot of failures, and a lot of successes, is what I call a safe haven project. So you isolate a certain area of the company around the problem that you're trying to address, the true problem. And by isolating it is almost like you are creating a new playing field in which new, not only explicit, formal, structural frameworks can be put in place, but also where a new culture can emerge. Because culture is, in my view, is always, it doesn't stick to the people, it sticks to the context. That's why we experience a different culture when we play Monopoly as opposed to playing another board game. So it's a reflection of the system. So if I create a safe haven in which other formal structures can be put in place, where I can take away certain management instruments, create a space of freedom where decisions can be made on the operational level, then a new culture can also emerge from that. But in order for that to happen, I need a safe boundary. I need to know as an employee, as I step into this new game, I'm not going to be stabbed in the back by doing something differently. And that requires a higher level of management buy-in that creates that organizational border. It's a bit like if you want to, I often make this example, if you want people to play ice hockey on a field hockey pitch, you can't just ask them to do that and maybe put out some, a few ice surfaces and put some the appropriate clothing on them. You're going to have to set up a new field where ice hockey can actually be played on. Otherwise, you're expecting people to behave in some kind of schizophrenic way, right? Because they have to do both at the same time, and that's impossible. So you need to create, my opinion, you need to create organizational boundaries. And if you build them around the problem that you're trying to solve, then new behavior can emerge.
So can you give an example perhaps from your own experience or from a client or whatever that you work with? So what would be an example, just to help me kind of picture this in my own mind, of what this safe haven project might look like?
Yeah. So client we had recently, they were trying to explore new ways of video marketing, and their existing patterns were very, they were very reliable, but also it was the beaten path. Everyone was acting upon that. Everything was geared around the way things were done. All organizational practices were, the culture was, and they've been trying to implement these new ideas for quite a while, and they were attached to certain people who had these ideas and were trying to drive them, but they were running out of fuel every time because they're running against these organizational boundaries. A lot of those boundaries were implicit, were cultural. So what we did is we asked the general manager of that unit to help us create a safe haven project, which means legitimize an area within that business where these employees were able to act independent of what has been practiced in the past, full time. Not like a lot of projects are done on the side, which often violates the entire idea of the boundary. So full time, the core team at least, and their only task was to solve this problem. And the problem was, we are able to reach more people in a more compelling way if we use different marketing practices, but we don't know how they need to be governed. We don't know how they need to be organized. So we're going to give you a complete free space in which you can explore that. But the condition is we need results. This is not like an experiment in which we allow you just to play around and then report to the board and the board makes new decisions. This is an actual live experiment that its learning environment is the market. It's not some internal reference. And what they did is they went in, they started this project, and immediately, and this is very typical, there was a really high friction, right, between the existing practices and in this existing environment and that team. There was a high cultural clash. And that's where it becomes interesting, because a lot of consultants or managers then want to try to resolve those conflicts because they think they are a bad thing. But they are inherent to two games being played in parallel. So, and what we were able to do is to comfort the general manager and make him understand that this is a natural. We told him before this is going to happen, right? So let the conflict be conflict, and it's going to run out of fuel.
I think that's a key point, right? It's normalizing the challenges, because if people don't expect these things to come, they feel, oh my word, it's going wrong. This is not working. It's being rejected. Whereas if people actually know this is part of the process, then you can kind of actually almost look forward to it. Oh, great, we're at this phase now. Great.
It's a bit like with personal challenges, right? I think it's similar. You try to adopt a new behavior, and you fight those inner fights.
Absolutely. I was talking with a client yesterday. And before I say this, I'm going to give his example, but I've been through the same thing this year myself, right? When we're on the transformational path, when we want to play a bigger game than we've ever played, when we want to multiply our impact, right, the type of this podcast, they get to a point where there's something deep in us that needs to shift because the old rules are not going to apply for us. And we have to always have our own safe haven project. And there is a moment when it doesn't seem to be working because we're changing our game. It's the same language as actually the one you've been using. And it's not working because the old game's no longer working because we're breaking the rules, but the new game isn't quite working either yet because we're still in that phase. And I had to encourage him yesterday and say, it's okay, you're doing a great job. This is actually encouraging because you're going to get the breakthrough if you keep going in this way. And it's that point.
It wouldn't be a true challenge, would it, if it wasn't associated with, or it wouldn't be a true breakthrough, let's say, a true innovation, if it wasn't accompanied by friction.
Yeah, and we tend to think, growth it's like this. I like drawing the exponential curve, great, but we know that the reality is like this. It goes back, it changes, and that's what we need to, at least what I find we need to hold on to in those moments.
Yeah, and that is a leadership capacity, being able to, and this is where I feel like theory really helps, because if you know this is going to happen, if you understand the patterns of change, it's much easier not to take that on personally, but to distance yourself from that and say, right, this is what's actually going on here. I knew this was going to happen, and I can tolerate it because it's part of the process.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation. This is just a quick interlude to remind you that my book, Making Time for Strategy, is now available. If you want to be less busy and more successful, I highly recommend that you check it out. Why not head over to makingtimeforstrategy.com to find out the details. Now, back to the conversation. Okay, so we've got a safe haven project. So we've taken a real problem, got a safe haven project. We've kind of anticipated the rejection from the system or the challenges that are going to come up. Anything else that you would recommend on this journey?
I mean, I've implicitly, or on a side note, I've already mentioned one thing that I think is crucial is when any behavior that you witness in senior management, as a senior manager, it's a great exercise to sit down and write, and I mean literally write down, how can the system that we have in place explain this behavior? How could I see this as a result of the framework that I've created, or at least that I am passively legitimizing? I spoke to board members of a bank recently, and we were talking about all these management instruments I was listing earlier. All these appraisal systems and commission systems and everything, and they hadn't even considered that they are the people who could make a change and get rid of these, or at least amend them, because it feels like it's God-given. You climb up the ladder, you end up in a board, and you start administrating something that's been there forever and that you think will be there forever. But it's those frameworks that you can actually change. So often the senior management I work with isn't aware of the fact that they can actually influence those frameworks and change them. And it's a much easier route than trying to change the people or changing the culture, which is impossible anyway, directly at least. So I would say it's a great exercise to sit down and explain behavior, not as a consequence of people's motives, but as a consequence of the context. And then you can selectively play around. You can for 3 months, you can switch off certain instruments and see what happens. I mean, behavior shaping instruments, people run after their targets. Of course they do. The next appraisal is due. Of course I'm going to account for that in my behavior. Of course I'm going to act politically if politics are at play, right? So the more you take that into account, the more clearer you can see why a certain behavior is so abundant.
Yeah, and actually, if you don't do that, you end up as a leader in victim thinking. Poor me, I can't do it. All these people, they're no good. They're not doing what they need to do, right? Whereas it's empowering to say, I can control this system, which is going to naturally encourage different modalities of behavior. So let me ask you, what would your checklist be, Mark, right? If you were, what would be like 3, 4, 5 things like, okay, how's the system explaining this behavior? What you mentioned targets, that's one thing, right? Look at targets. What other things might you want to just consider in that thought process?
I've got a list, and I've literally got it open here on my desktop background, because it's such a common topic, is all the little things that are in place that we overlook their detrimental impact, right? So 360 feedback. People think it's great. What I think it creates is a 24/7 observatory, which makes me as an employee constantly pay attention to how might I be graded or judged by my superior, by my peers, and by my employees. Of course, that's going to have an influence on my behavior. Do I want that? Do I want that uniformity? Do I want to judge people by that criteria? Assessment centers, balanced scorecards, cost center thinking, and all the time tracking that's attached to that, signature policies, job title madness, sales targets, travel policies. You were talking about how often things are made for 1%. I think travel policies are often put into place because someone at some point in time traveled in an unacceptable way, and then from there you build this insane system, right, that everyone has to adhere to. And the root cause of all of that was one guy, probably bringing you in a 2 million project, but flying first class. And because it's treated separately in the head, yeah, you got us that great project, but but he traveled first class, and that's a bit obscene, isn't it? So we need a rule for that. And then that rule isn't enough, and the next one comes into place. So you asked for a concrete checklist. I would say go through these management practices and ask yourself rigorously, which ones do we really need? And which ones really help value creation? Maybe add one little thing. And I'm not suggesting that all of them are bad in general. What I'm suggesting is that there's, and you mentioned earlier, there's a divide in value creation that we often overlook. One is, I call it routine work. And routine work still requires all that Tayloristic management approach that we've been that's the foundation of our past success. And then there's creative work, which you can only master if all those internal references don't stand in your way. If you can fully focus on what it's really about. And that requires a completely different organizational principle. So it's not that they're generally bad, they're selectively bad. And I think that's one thing that management can focus on as a first step.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. This tension between the creative work that we need to do, and then all this kind of all the structures that we're asked to comply with, and how does one actually get in the way of the other, and when? What comes to my mind is this idea of the via negativa, right? Which is success by removal, right? Success by removing things, and we often don't go there. We think what we need is more stuff, like a new rule, like a meta overall controlling policy for all the other policies we have, or something. And perhaps sometimes, right, but probably there's a lot more power by simplifying and by saying, what's no longer serving us here? What's actually getting in the way?
I think CEOs should be applauding their managers by removal, or for removal, rather than for addition. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, fascinating. So Mark, I know that you run a business called Intrinsify that I guess does this kind of stuff, or helps companies with exactly this question. So tell me, what your goals are for that business. How do you want Intrinsify to multiply its impact over the coming years? What would breakthrough success look like for you?
We've got a description of a future state that reflects what I think you are asking, which is if we operate mainly in the German-speaking world, right? So the company's based in Germany. I happen to be half English and I live in England, but that's just a coincidence, really. And what we see in the future is that if a management team is reflecting on the way they run their business and they want to educate their managers on a new way of thinking, then we're witnessing this conversation, right, in the board. And one guy says, "Oh, we should send them to, do you know St. Gallen? The famous Swiss management school, or many schools that are based there. It's, in Germany, that's one of the go-to places for management education." What I would love is if after one of the board members has said, "Well, we should send them there. That's what everyone does," then at least two others say, "Hold on, have you not heard of Intrinsify? That is the real reference today. That's the institution that you need to learn from, because that's a refreshing, new, and necessary view on how organizations should be run." So what we're trying to do is become a bit of an authority. And we are already, fortunately. A lot of people know us, at least within the agile scene and the kind of transformational scene. But ideally, one day we will be an authority where it becomes normal to look for advice or training in this kind of field of what we call system theory, and ideally with us. And we're also trying to push that topic forwards, because what we're talking about here is a lot of it is fed by a theory that is based on a German sociologist called Niklas Luhmann, who passed away in 1998. Not well known outside the German-speaking world, but a lot of his messages and his insights are in line with, say, what Deming says, for example. 94% of the problems that you have in a system are actually caused by the system rather than the people. It goes a bit beyond that, but it's similar outcome, and we want to advertise that thinking. We want to get people to understand that there's a different way of looking at businesses that is a lot more fruitful, and we can see that in practice. Look at W. L. Gore, look at Southwest Airlines, look at Toyota. If you look at these businesses through this lens, you will find a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. It's a high performance organizational principle that works in today's dynamic markets, and we're just trying to advertise that. We're trying to get that into the world and get people to talk about it.
Fantastic. And so, as you work on that to become that authority with that extra reach over and above what you currently have, what's the personal stretch for you? So, how do you need to shift if you want to multiply your own impact as a leader, right? Because we always get in the way, in some sense, of our own goals, right? If you look inside, what's going to have to, what's the growth edge for you as you multiply your impact?
I think one of my, and we're literally working that with a consultant ourselves at the moment. One of my, or our, but definitely also my constraints is that we have always been very reluctant to actively advertise. We've always come from that philosophy. You need to farm. You shouldn't hunt. So we produce content, and we sometimes become a bit self-serving. We talk about the theory a lot. We love the theory behind it. It becomes a bit circular. Sometimes I think we're not addressing imminent needs that a CEO has, or people who make important decisions in a business. We don't understand them enough. Although we've worked with them a million times, we don't understand their needs enough. And we always come along this theoretical route that once they get it, they find very insightful and very useful, and they can draw a lot of benefit from it for their business. And we've seen, the impact it has. But it's a very counterintuitive entry. It's difficult to get into this thinking, and I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by making it too abstract. And I have a tendency to always go down that route, despite having worked, in the shop floor many times. And I think we need to be a bit more aggressive. Might be the wrong word because it sounds too pushy, but I think we would benefit from taking a few shortcuts on explaining the bigger picture, and rather going straight into benefits you can draw tomorrow from as a decision maker. And I struggle with that. Like it's almost like a guard that I'm putting up. No, hold on. You need to understand the theory first. You can't just march off and go about your daily business. You've come back here. We need to work this out first. And I think that we're standing our own way by doing that, and we need to reach people's needs more directly.
Yeah, it sounds like Steve Jobs feeling he would need to explain how computers worked before he sold one.
Yeah, it's a bit like that. No, I think that's a very good comparison. And it feels, I don't know, it's some kind of righteousness thing. I want to prove that we have the right theory or something, that it makes sense, and it's probably a pretty deep flaw that I need to overcome.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I'm a sucker for a good theory as well. I love to kind of go through that in order to then bring focus to my own action. But not everybody works that way, and a lot of people, they just want just show me something that works. And then once they do that, they go, oh, yeah, I'm curious, why does that work? But we don't always come from that place. I suppose what I'd be asking you if I was in this moment would be to say, well, I'm curious as to what's the system going on with Intrinsify that leads you to continually have that behavior, right?
Right. Yeah. That would be a very legitimate question.
Because you might have a propensity, but it sounds like it's not just you, right? It's your colleagues as well who are perhaps going that way. So, perhaps you need to incentivize them to push back against your theoretical instincts or something.
Yeah, we're getting better at it by putting people in place and giving them more authority to make those decisions, override certain patterns that we have.
Here's an idea, and I have very little background in philosophy, but one thing I always love to say is sell the experience and not the theory, right? Not the concept. And that's why, whenever I try not to talk about what I do. I just say to people, should we do something together? Let's just spend a couple of hours together. And then you've got an experience of what I do, rather than me talking conceptually about what the benefits might be. And perhaps there's something similar. You can say, well, let's have take this kind of issue. Do you have people in your company who have got this issue? They're not, one of your video camera issues. And then let's just examine what the root causes of that might be for an hour. Boom.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Intellectually, I've got to that point. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to talk about it with you. But the instincts still override that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It's getting there.
Yeah, and the other thing that's fascinating about this is more general is it's because we attach a label to our forehead. And so the way that you show up is the way we all show up is with some kind of label. So in your case, it might be, like leading edge thinker on this topic or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
And so because you come with that label, it's like, well, I now need to show that I'm a leading edge thinker by telling you about my thinking. And so when we come with that kind of almost professorial identity, I need to show you that I'm equal to all these other thinkers, management thinkers or whatever, then probably our behavior then falls out of that identity. And it's interesting to say, well, what if that became a tool in the toolbox? There's a moment when you can reach in and pull that out. Yeah, there's times when I want to be this, high-end intellectual management thinker. But overall, there's a bigger mission that I'm on, a bigger identity that I want to absorb. And that's now a tool in the toolbox. Might be interesting just to think about what that other label would be for you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And at least it can always be my organization, right? Because we have different roles, we've got different strengths. So as we grow, it becomes a lot easier to let the people who have a more practical approach shine in the right moment and use my label when we need it. And what I find so cynical almost about it is that I can obviously use my own theory to explain this behavior. It's a bit circular in that sense. Like what you just said about the label, there's system theory is great in explaining why that happens. So I should be very aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, Mark, it's been a fascinating conversation. If people want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
If they speak German, they will find it very easy. I have my website is actually also in English, but I'm actually planning on starting to publish a lot of my content on Twitter in English. But other than that, most of my content so far, there's a few YouTube videos in English, but most of it is in German. Because I have a fairly unique name, it's very easy to find me.
Got it. Perfect. And then your business is intrinsify.com?
DE.
Intrinsify.de. Great. Perfect. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure. It's been a fun geeking out on some of the theory, definitely. Although staying actually quite practical as well, I think, for many leaders here on what might they actually do when they see these behaviors in their organizations and how might they start to go about thinking about those differently. So appreciate it and look forward to following along as you continue to build out Intrinsify to being the leading authority in the German-speaking world.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much, Richard.
Well, that's a wrap. If you received value from this conversation, please do leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'd deeply appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out the show notes from this episode, head to xquadrant.com/podcast, where you'll find all the details. Now, finally, when you're in top leadership, who supports and challenges you at a deep level to help you multiply your impact? Discover more about the different ways we can support you at xquadrant.com.